I want to thank Dr. Rice. I want to thank President Thomas for creating this opportunity. And today the topic of my talk is Wakanda Revolution Do You Want? The truth of the matter is I decided to address Wakanda today because so many of us have begun a conversation publicly, whether it's Facebook, whether it's social media, with our families about what black possibility could be. And I hope you'll join me on this. Now up front, I gotta let y'all know, I'm not a comic book head. So some of y'all may be like, oh, brother's talking about Wakanda and Black Panther. I need to debate him about whether Jack Kirby or Ta-Nehisi Coates wrote the best version. I can't do it, right? That's not my wheelhouse. However, I want to say that there is something important and significant about the Black Panther movie emerging at this moment in history. In particular, some folks have talked about Wakanda fever as a marketing ploy, right? How is it that some marketing company was able to get us all hyped up and connected to this experience? In reality, I think there is something far greater than marketing at play here. It's actually about who we are and what we want. Wakanda is a place that many of us desire to go because many of us have been denied Wakanda in our life. We desire to go to Wakanda because it is ideal in many ways. It looks like a world we know, but a world that is renewed and has a different orientation. Some folks have even been so bold as to say, well, y'all going and spending all this money to see a movie about Wakanda, but you won't even spend your own money on your people. Y'all heard that? Well, I think there may be some truth to that, but we also have to recognize that black empowerment doesn't simply mean spending dollars. In fact, we come from a tradition of storytellers, where folks like Octavia Butler will write about a world that we have not seen, but we can feel and understand in supernatural ways. We come from a tradition where the griot or the jali will sit outside and tell our traditions. We come from a tradition where old folks will sit on the porch all day, sip liquor, and weave tales of fact and fiction that tell you how to find joy in the midst of despair. Black Panther comes into this tradition, and it is my goal to make sure that we are continuing to move towards a tradition that honors the past, but that creates a different future. Now, Wakanda itself is visually stunning. It has technology that is able to literally heal. It has technology that is able to create. Wakanda is so beautiful for so many of us because it's the reconciliation of the diaspora, the spread out of African folks. And when you're in Wakanda, you can hear dialects that range from the top of the continent to the bottom of the continent. And when you're in Wakanda, you see the children of immigrants standing next to the children of those who are native born. It is so important and powerful to us in many ways because it is a place that we've been denied. Many of us who are of African descent, and that's everybody in this room, have been denied. We've been told you're different. We've been told you were set apart. We've been told that you are not what your ancestors were and you have actually dropped the baton. Well, I think it's important that we realize the narratives of what we've been told about who we are don't always match up completely. When I think about Wakanda and I think about the conversations that have emerged around Pan-Africanism, I think about the work of W.E.B. Du Bois. I think about the work of Kwame Nkrumah. I think about the work of Queen Mother Moore. Because these people would actually be excited about the possibility of all of us coming together to discuss what could be. Not simply living in discussing what is, but where we should go. But I'm also reminded of the words of Edward Said. And Edward Said was a political philosopher who came from Palestine. And as a Palestinian, he was pushed out of his homeland and it was taken from him. And Said's notion of exile should be important to us because he talks about being simultaneously questing for home, but being locked away from home. So for many Africans in America, this is a story that we know. For many of us, reconciliation with the past and the present is a troubling thing. For some of us, the separation from home came when we ended up in chattel slavery. For some of us, it stops because we can't trace our lineage directly back to our ancestors. For others, that separation comes when the ship stopped in the Caribbean, when the ship stopped in Brazil, when the ship stopped in places where they speak Spanish, and while they too are black, their blackness is questioned because they don't speak English, right? We have to have a more complicated notion of the diaspora. For some of us, our separation has come because our parents moved to this land and they taught us to speak Wolof. They taught us to speak Twi. But when we go back home, we're called strangers. We're called different. We're called everything but a member of our community. We have to be very careful that we haven't created so many boundaries and differences between us that we miss out on commonalities. See, the tale of difference is actually their tale. The tale of being conquered is actually their tale. Our tale is much more majestic. I'm enlisting you today to be part of a new set of historians, a new set of truth tellers and seers, a new set of change agents who are willing to write a story of African people that transcends locality, that creates community, but honors difference. I understand how significant Wakanda is because when I was coming up, I'm not going to lie to you, the first time I came to Morehouse, it kind of felt like it was Wakanda. Now, this is a while ago, but when I wrote my essay to Morehouse, I opened it with, "A million black men walking towards one direction, the cream of the planet, resurrection." Now, at that point, bars, it ain't mine, let me be very clear. At that point, that was a bar or a line from an underground rapper known as Common Sense, right? Now he is the actor known as Common. But I found that his words were so important because they brought me back to the Million Man March that happened as I was finishing up high school. And I remember the feeling of attending the Million Man March. I remember ascending the stairwell out of the metro onto the mall in Washington and just having an electricity hit me in my chest. All of a sudden, it felt like I was in a different place. I'd been to DC dozens of times in my life, but I looked out and I saw a beautiful range of faces. I saw old men. I saw young men. I saw disabled men. I saw folks who were willing and ready and able to create change. And I wanted that feeling. I didn't want to have it just one day. I wanted to recreate it. So when I came to Morehouse, my goal was to have my Million Man March experience in perpetuity. And to a degree, I got some of that. When I got here, there was the anticipation of arrival. I had the trepidation of NSO as it proceeded. It was the first time that I sat in a class with someone that looked like me, that I thought I could outdo, and they just smoked me, right? Those experiences made me realize, wow, Morehouse really is a special place. It was so special to me that right across the street we had Spelman, we had Clark, we had Morris Brown, and at my fingertips I had a range of folks who looked like me, who may think differently than me, but there was possibility. And while it was new, it wasn't perfect. See, I grew up in West Haven, Connecticut, and now I'm gonna keep it real. Every time I tell folks I'm from Connecticut, folks are like, "There's black people there?" Yes, there's a lot of black folks. We're like above the median split on blackness, right? And I grew up realizing that the hazards that I faced from in kindergarten being asked to repeat kindergarten because I just wasn't emotionally mature. Or maybe it was in high school when they told me I had a learning disability that they never actually cared enough to diagnose, but they cared to set me aside. I realized that many of us, I had gone through trying to figure out by the age of 15 how to survive a police encounter because it was inevitable. See, those were spaces that I entertained, and when I started to look at the narratives of black men, I also realized that my life, my song, my story wasn't always present. I loved hip hop. But hip-hop told a particular narrative, and most of the narratives kept on talking about the idea of someone who had to hop over crack vials to succeed, someone who had to do beat impossible odds for basic survival, and I realized that I needed to see something else. I needed to write something else. As a sociologist, it's why I wrote the book Inequality in the Promised Land. I was like, well, we actually have to talk about the range of black life, not just one form of black life. Until we actually have enough lions, then we can't tell our tale. There's an African proverb that says, until lions have their own historians, tales of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. For so long, we have depended on their narratives to talk about who we are. We have depended on their narratives to decide what we dream. We've depended on their narratives to decide how we speak. Morehouse represented a place where I could be my own, I could have my own, and I could build my own. I share this part of my personal narrative because, as our feminist foremothers have taught us, the personal is political. Our personal understanding influences how we see the politics of the world and what we choose to be active on. Now, when I arrived at Morehouse, I wouldn't necessarily call myself an activist, but once I left here, I had no choice but to be one. The truth of it is that while I was here, I had to grow as an activist because I was quite myopic. I'm a black man, I'm a black cis man, I'm a black hetero cis man, and I've experienced harm in my life. And I will ultimately experience more harm. When I came to Morehouse, I was deeply steeped in the narratives and the tropes of black male endangerment. They were all around me in the books I read. They were all around me in the conversations I had. Whether we were sitting and building in ciphers, people talked about the crisis of the black man, and I was all the way in. While I think the crisis of the black male is important and the endangerment of the black male is something we've talked about, one of the things those narratives sometimes do is they keep us from seeing the fullness of reality around us. And so I hope today you'll go with me to think about how you can change your vision, because I was loving Wakanda. I was loving Morehouse. I was loving the AUC until my second semester as a freshman year when we had the incident. The incident at that time was an alleged, and yes, I learned to say alleged because of the incident, an alleged sexual assault between Morehouse and Spelman. I was very naive at that point, and I was quite distraught. I said, well, how could folks sexually assault each other, rape each other? We've really got to do something about it. But by the time I got back to the dorm to talk about it, there were brothers saying, yo, LaRue, hold on, like, you believe her? Like, I mean, women lie all the time. And I found myself at a moment of discomfort. First, I wanted to find a place where we could heal from, but I realized we weren't even having a similar set of conversations. And so then I went to class and I heard professors talking about the need to protect the image and the brand of Morehouse. I saw folks circling the wagons around, making sure that our brothers at all costs were not carted off into jail cells. And in many ways, I felt connected because I had been told about the danger of being a black man in America, and I surely didn't want another person locked behind bars. But the danger of this is that I didn't realize so many folks who were playing devil's advocate were actually advocating for the devil. I didn't actually realize that in my myopia of understanding the condition of black men, that I had missed the condition of our sisters. I didn't understand that 1 in 5 women who attend college will experience sexual assault. I didn't understand that as you look at black women, that number increases. See, I was in a place where I was able to articulate my position and my concerns, but my concerns would often trample over others. I was also so naive because I thought the incident was the only incident of sexual assault that was happening. See, I didn't have a big enough vision to realize that this moment that sparked a discussion was actually the tip of an iceberg. You all may be familiar with this from your current settings, but I think it's important to have sustained conversation about what sexual assault and survival looks like. Because it took a lot for me to grow my sight to realize that also 5% of men in college are also sexually assaulted. It took me to grow my sight to realize 21% of our trans, queer, and gender nonconforming siblings are also sexually assaulted. See, we can have a conversation about the Wakanda that we want to build, but we also have to talk about healing in Wakanda. We have to make sure that we are looking not only at our problems individually, but the collectivity of experiences so that we produce something that is robust, that is rich, that is loving, that is so desirable that we may even have to protect the borders to keep folks out. Right? The truth of the matter is, I started to learn about the world more at Morehouse, and I started to flirt with the concept of revolution. Now, revolution is a thing that sounds good. It's a thing that people love to talk about. Y'all may know the Last Poets, and the Last Poet says, are scared of revolution, right? It was in the 1970s, in the midst of the Black Power movement, that they said, when I look out at what black folks are doing, many people are scared to change. Many people are scared to commit to the revolution. Their idea of revolution is little incremental change. It's not something radical. See, they understood that our cities were being transformed, that poverty was being concentrated. And as poverty was concentrated, some of us and some of our parents escaped the city. And they went on those highways out into suburban spaces, and instead of dealing with what was happening in the city, they went off into the quiet storm. They talked about the nostalgia of the past, of the black communities that were great. But what they did was they moved their bodies and their commitment away from where our folks were. See, it may be that we've miscalculated what we can afford to give up. I'll say that again. It may be that we've already miscalculated what we can afford to give up. Because some of us have moved. Some of us have changed so that we could get that corporate job. Some of us have changed so we could get that car. Some of us have changed so that we can have that American dream. Problem is that the American dream often, actually, let me say it clearly. Problem with the American dream is that it wasn't designed for you. Malcolm X said, I don't see a dream, I see a nightmare. So many of us have bought into the idea of we can get in and get along and succeed instead of tearing down a system that was built to oppress us. Because the truth of the matter is that revolutionary struggle is going to take on many forms. Now, when I was at Morehouse, I thought revolutionary struggle was something that looked like stockpiling weapons. I thought it looked like military formation. I thought it looked like fiery rhetoric, right? I thought it looked like Killmonger saying, "Is this your king?" Right? For me, that was a moment that I thought, when we get closer to a revolution, people will be ready to take up arms. They'll be ready to kill for what they need. But that was too narrow. See, I was confused about revolution, and I want to make sure that you're clear today in the distinction between rhetoric and revolution. Because I hope that we actually move from believing in rhetoric to actually the work of building anew and taking away and generating things. See, in my lifetime, brother, the prison population has increased 150%. Now, that plan was in motion for a while. And the problem is, I didn't really understand it. And while I was at Morehouse, Angela Davis went over to Spelman to speak. And I went with my sister, Osizwe Harwell, and I was excited to hear about Angela Davis. Now, I read some books, but I didn't know a whole lot about Angela. I knew that she was a sister with a phenomenal fro. I knew that she was, militant and had dapper clothes. And when I got there, I'll never forget how disappointed I was. See, I got into the auditorium at Spelman, and I heard Angela Davis talk about prison. And I was like, I already know about prison. They locking us up left, right, and center. And I listened to Angela Davis pose the question, are prisons obsolete? And I was like, not for everybody, because I know some cats who be doing dirt, right? But it was actually my naivete, because I went into Angela Davis's lecture expecting her to be bombastic. I went into her lecture expecting her to match my conception of revolution. I went into her lecture expecting her to provide the perfect communist solution to the economic oppression that we've been experiencing locally and globally. The problem is that Angela Davis had grown. Angela knew what it was to stockpile weapons. Angela knew what it was to deal with communism. But Angela also knew the most revolutionary act that we had to do was heal as a community. See, I wasn't there yet. And it was my arrogance and naivete that kept me from seeing the value of it. The truth is that Angela Davis was setting me up to think about where struggle can exist outside of the streets. Now, it should exist in the streets, but it also has to exist in the classroom. It also has to exist in the church. It also has to exist in the masjid. It has to exist in all the places that we are so that there is no stone that's left unturned. To be clear, I support us getting into the streets, but I also support us having a longer vision of change. Sometimes we measure change too narrowly. I got folks talking to me about, well, do you think Black Lives Matter worked? Well, the true time management or the measure of revolution is not days or weeks or a year, it's decades. Our ancestors, starting from 1619 to the 1860s, resisted day in and day out. We don't stop 4 years in and say that we'll never be free. We actually have to study so that we have a longer view of what it takes to cause change. Because we're at a moment, a political and social moment, that calls for nothing less than revolution. And when I say revolution, I mean that everyone has to be enlisted. If you're living and listening right now, it is necessary for you to be part of the solution, or you are inherently a part of the problem. Now, coming to Morehouse puts you on a unique trajectory as a black man. Some of y'all can buy in or sell out and live your lives very comfortably. But for others of us, we have to even deal with the remaining factor that in 2018, 35% of black children live beneath the poverty line. We have to deal with still people every day are deported back to countries that they don't actually know as home because of the ways in which despotic rulers have changed our laws. We have to get really clear that the battle to transform this country will not only happen at neo-Nazi rallies, but it's gonna happen when you're in your internship and you start talking to Susan at the water cooler. Because Susan voted for Donald Trump. Susan didn't tell you, but she's gonna do it again, right? We have to have a more sophisticated understanding of where the fight is. Because when you are in a place of social repression, you have to understand the many hats that evil wears. It comes in racism, it comes in capitalism, it comes in ableism, it comes in heterosexism, it comes in nativism. These are the many masks that you have to learn to study and respond to. Now, sometimes it feels like word mumbo jumbo, but the truth of the matter is we're trying to figure out the building blocks to build something different. Because there are some places where we've missed, and we have to do things that innovate. We have to go back to the very fundamental nature of who we were. As an African people in this country and globally, we've always understood food. We've always understood agriculture. But how many of us today could grow our own food? How many of us today could hunt and fish so that we could survive? See, we come from a folks who understood the power of education lied far beyond the school building. But many of us have brought into a test-centric, false meritocratic notion of education that says drill and test and drill and test, and which charter school is the best, right? We actually have to question how we build citizens and community members and make sure that every child knows their worth and their value, but they also know that their culture is not the enemy. Because far too long and far too often these schools tell our kids the only thing that's wrong are your values. We've got to imagine a world that doesn't live with punitive measures as justice. See, many of us think the way to get justice is to inflict harm on those who have created harm. The problem is that never leads to healing. It leads to more problems. We've got to be in a place where we're willing to embrace our siblings who are incarcerated and say, we don't throw you away, but we pull you in. We desire to heal you. The institutions this country and this world has created were not meant to save us. They were meant to sever and divide us. So we have to do something that looks very different. We got to get committed to real revolution. And a real revolution comes about by asking different questions about the world around you. It comes from being able to provide new answers, and it comes from being humble enough to correct yourself when you've offered a solution that didn't work. For years, I've made the mistake of thinking that revolutionaries were those who could break apart an argument. You know, you've been in a conversation with someone and you believe something and they start asking you questions and they get more pointed and you wonder, was I right? We sometimes privilege destruction, right? There's a point in which I thought revolutionary action was about how militarily you were trained, your ability to do hand-to-hand combat and break bones. We've come to value a notion of power that is hyper-masculine. But a true revolutionary knows that even if you have the power to destroy, more important is the power to build. A true revolutionary knows if you have the power to hurt, you darn well better have the power to heal. Because if not, what you do is simply create destruction that spreads across the land. See, that's why I have a lot of trouble with folks who say, well, I watched Black Panther and I'm Killmonger. He had a point. Well, he did have a point, but it was a quite dangerous point because I'm like, do you want to be the brother who has literally taken on the ways of the colonizer? Right? It was Morehouse that introduced me to the work of Marimba Ani. And Marimba Ani said, don't take on a European as silly and call yourself African-centered. Because Killmonger himself is the one who came into the community and said, there are elders, I disregard them. There is medicine, I'll burn it. The ancestors, I will greet them and then stop anyone else from having continuity. We got to be real careful about what we imagine revolution as, because sometimes revolution is quiet. Sometimes revolution is smooth. Don't make me T'Challa. Don't make me Killmonger. I want to be Nakia. I want to be the person who literally puts their life on the line to free children from Boko Haram. I want to be the person who understands that when there's corrupt leadership in the government, I don't pledge allegiance to that leadership. I pledge allegiance to the people. I want to be the person who makes different personal decisions because I might have been in a relationship with you at one point, but it ain't a good idea to go back. I want to make sure that my choices are healthy and generative. Far too often we equate revolution with destruction, but revolution is actually the ability to break down and to build up. See, we're going to have to move to a place where folks understand their worth and folks work to honor everyone's worth. Now, I got to ask you, if you want to go to Wakanda, if you want to have an idyllic situation, I've got to check your ingredients. Because some folks are willing to create a Wakanda where children wouldn't be safe. Some folks are willing to create a Wakanda because of what they believe to be their ideology where queer folks wouldn't be safe. Some folks are willing to create a Wakanda that centers male experience so much that they wouldn't even be able to tell me if sexual assault happened to women. See, if we aren't careful, we'll make the same errors that the Panthers did. And I'm talking now about the Black Panther Party. I'm talking about read the work of Elaine Brown in A Taste of Power. I'm talking about listen to the voices of women like Assata, Afeni, and see what they said about the experience of a hyper-masculine revolutionary that fails to see the importance of gender and the importance of community. See, the problem is we can't all commit, actually, no. The good thing is we shouldn't all commit revolutionary suicide, as Huey Newton said. Instead, we got to do the work of staying around. We got to do the work of actually straightening out the edges. We got to do the work of figuring out what it means to survive, live, thrive, and build. See, you actually have the seeds for your Wakanda right here. Because sometimes people think that their classes are just simply perfunctory. I would sit at the feet of Dr. LeVar Smith. I would sit and learn about African politics and understand how geopolitics and neoliberalism transform and neocolonialism matter today. Because you can't have it. You can't have Wakanda if you don't understand that. I would sit at the feet of a David Wall Rice. I would wonder and ask him, how do I have a fluid identity? How can I move through spaces, not giving myself up, but transforming where I move? I would sit at the feet of an Adria Welcher. I would ask her, how is it that in the midst of all the things that have come, black women have sustained communities, have created new choices and new realities in the midst of a living hell, when many black men have given up? See, the Wakanda that I want, the Wakanda that we need, it centers on elders. See, an elder's wisdom gets you to the next place. Young folks believe that revolution is about strength, but old folks believe it's about wisdom. We need some young folks who act old, some young folks who make some different decisions about who we are. And when you get yourself a set of elders, when you get yourself a set of folks who see the world differently, don't look for them to be perfect. Do not look for your elders to be perfect. Not your grandma, not your grandpa, not your professor, because they're human. In fact, what you look for are the lessons, and in their imperfections, you grow too. Too many of us have forsaken who we are because you saw someone, you followed someone, and they made a mistake. Yeah, of course they did. And you will make them too. Don't be arrogant enough to give up on those who showed you a door, showed you a path, because they may need you to refine their errors and continue their work. See, that is the marathon that we're in. Because Wakanda was not built in a day, and it cannot be built in a day. The other day, I was having a conversation about this talk, and a friend of mine, Tendaji Bailey, said to me, I get what you're saying, but we can't really build no Wakanda without no vibranium. I was like, that's fair. And he said, well, what do you think the vibranium is? I said, we got vibranium. Like, yo, you realize we been had vibranium. The catch is the colonizer knew it. The colonizer knew it. In fact, you sitting next to the vibranium right now. African people are the vibranium. Now, let me be clear. You may get a sequel to Black Panther where folks invade Wakanda and try to break across the mountain to get the vibranium. But the truth of it is the magic is right here. Europeans came and they saw us as so powerful and so magical that they were like, we got to separate this and get some of it. We made your rice. We made your music. We made your culture. We taught you how to heal. We raised children. No matter where that boat stopped, society transformed. See, the problem is it's our responsibility to return the vibranium to its rightful place. It's our responsibility to look at the brother to the right of us and the brothers to the left of us and not say stuff that's foolish like, you won't be here when we're done. Instead, to say like, oh, you coming with me, right? When we connect up, our collective power is unstoppable. The secret that the ancestors knew when they were in the hulls of the slave ship, if you read Daniel Omotosho's Black the Coming, right? You'll learn that the ancestors didn't give up. They literally transformed how they saw each other. They saw those differences, they honored those differences, but they worked to create a commonality. Because we need the vibranium that goes back to the concept of Ubuntu. We need the vibranium that says, I am because we are. We need the vibranium because today, the places that we come from, whether it's in Dakar or Detroit, they're being colonized again. You can call it gentrification, you can call it whatever you want. We need the ability to stand together so that a people who have been scattered about the globe can return to who they are. But it's gonna take a lot to do that. It's gonna take a lot more listening. It's gonna take a lot more honoring. It's gonna take a lot more sticking through it. Because the problem with building Wakanda is that some of us are so high and mighty that once we put in the work, if it don't come out exactly like we want to give it up. Don't do it. You may be 2 years in the Morehouse and you've decided this ain't working out. I'm just gonna go somewhere else. Stick it out. The most revolutionary act that I can think of, and there's a great sister by the name of Grace Lee Boggs, and she was an organizer in Detroit. She's an ancestor now, a good friend of Malcolm X. And I went to her and I said, Sister Grace, I want to know what the single most revolutionary thing that one person can do is. And she said to me, the most revolutionary thing that you can do is to build a home and stay there. Build community around you. Too many of us have been convinced of the idea that our wealth lies outside of our house. This house, our house, Morehouse, can be the source of our healing. But it can only be the source of our healing if we learn how to listen differently. It can only be the source of our healing if we start to understand that just because I don't have your same experience doesn't mean that we're actually different. See, what I want is for us to understand that even in the darkness, even when the money ain't right, even when financial aid drops your classes, even when your GPA drops lower than some, that we still are divine. I want you to know that the Wakanda that we need is here. You, my dear brothers, are the ones who are meant to build Wakanda. All that Calvary folks been talking about is coming, it's you. The only folks who will save us will be us, but only if we learn how to love us. Wakanda is waiting for you to listen. Wakanda is waiting for you to learn. Wakanda is waiting for you to work. Wakanda is waiting for you to fight. Wakanda is waiting for you to build anew. My only question that I have for you is, what kind of revolution do you want? Thank you. Thank y'all. And so I ended a little bit early because I want to do a little Q&A. If y'all have anything, I would love to hear it. Yes, brother. Okay. All right. Nick from Miami, computer science majors, has asked, what is the most important element that we need as a Morehouse to build that Wakanda-like situation? At Morehouse, the answer is brotherhood. So one of the most beautiful things about Morehouse is that they push you into a brotherhood. Folks that you don't know become your sibling, become your family. Now, the biggest danger is that in 2018, some of us treat Morehouse kind of like a commuter school, that we kind of pop into class and we pop back out. You got to invest in this place and invest in relationships. These relationships are what get you to the next place, right? I know Dr. Smith from sitting in Gloria de Cunha Jabai's Spanish class. I know Supreme Understanding from being in ciphers. I know Sean King from just walking along the yard. If you run in and out, you can't actually build community. Slow down, look around, find your vibranium between you. Excellent. Jabari? No. Say it again? Jair. Okay, so Jair gave me a long question, but I'm going to summarize a little bit, right? I got the cheers when I was talking about doing a lot of revolution work. When it came to gender nonconforming folks and queer folks, people were like, oh, right? So I believe that the move from rhetoric to revolution is us being bold enough to say, yeah, our queer siblings are our siblings. It's actually us doing the studying of understanding the construction of gender. And gender, like race, is a system of power that is meant to endow some folks with it and take it away from others. We also have to do the studying to realize that in pre-colonial Africa, folks were queer too. And folks played with gender and moved. But many of us don't do that. We like, I was on YouTube and they had said, I'm sure they did. Read a book, brothers. Read a book and listen. When I was at Morehouse, one of the things that I think we did very poorly is that we didn't listen to our brothers or to our siblings who were gender nonconforming or queer. It was actually just quiet conversation. If you can create an environment where you can listen to people's experiences, you can actually start creating community and inclusion. If you don't listen and you just acknowledge in passing, then you create the same systems of oppression and heterosexism and patriarchy that have been the pain and the problem to all of our movements. So I literally think you have to, if you are cis, if you are hetero, shut up and listen. Shut up and listen, and then act in accord and behalf with folks who have been experiencing something you don't fully understand. We're going to work on that. I know, we're going to work on that. That's my challenge to you. Because when I was in that seat, I probably would have did a tepid clap too. And the longer I've lived and the more I've seen about black folks and what we need, I'm like, no, we can't afford to be lukewarm on a question. We can't. That is literally washing your hands of responsibility. And FRA says when you wash your hands of responsibility in a contest between those who have power and those who don't, you're siding with the oppressor. Stop washing your hands and get to work. Thank you. Thank you. That's a good question. Y'all know Dr. Black, right? Ashe. My simple answer is we need the God that we've always had. The problem is that many of us have been taught to reduce and limit God. God looks like me. God looks like exactly what my grandmama taught. God has got to be fashioned in this way and been called by this tongue, right? God is, and we are part of that is. We have to understand the multitude of ways in which our spiritual endowment actually motivate us to social action. So for me, I find myself pouring libation and acknowledging the ancestors, just as I can also find myself in church, just as I can also find myself out of my shit, right? I can also have a big enough view of God, say, even if you don't believe or agree, that I can treat you with honor. I don't have to say, oh, you don't believe like I believe, so then we can't be. Absolutely wrong. If that's the case, what kind of God do you serve? Because the very creation that exists, you've denied. So I think we need the God we've always had. I think we need to see it anew and see it the way our ancestors did. You may not have the tongue, you may not have the language, you may not have the text, but you have the breath and the life. So continue to breathe, continue to praise, continue to create. I'll keep on coming as much as I can. I got a job and a family in New York. Anybody else? Oh, yes, sir. Jeffrey, all right, let me ask you, have you ever been stuck in your ways? How did you change?
Opened my mind.
You opened your mind. Literally, you woke up one day and you said, my mind's open. Like, what did you do?
I started interacting more with people, started learning how to, ways, because where I come from, different things take place. So once I came here, I was like, oh, this is different, I had to adapt. So once I adapted and adjusted, it became easy.
All right, great. So Jeffrey asked the question of when you're dealing with folks, how do you open their minds if they're closed-minded? So then I asked Jeffrey, have you ever been closed-minded? And he was like, yes. And I said, well, how did you change? And he said, I opened my mind. But what he actually said was he opened his mind to the possibility of interacting with folks and seeing something different than what he thought he knew. A lot of us come from places where we think we have the answers, or folks will tell you and convince you they have the answers. If you are open, you can find a way to see something differently. And if you're wise, you'll realize that your sight inherently is limited. As an academic, as a person, I know that I can write an article, I can write a book, and there are things that I am still missing. None of us are so flawless that we're infallible. Learn what you need to learn by opening up and say, what I have is a beginning, but it is not the end. Morehouse was a place that I learned to think critically. It was a place that I learned to love myself more, but it wasn't the limit of possibility. I graduated here 18 years ago, and I darn sure have kept growing. To not grow would be to commit to death, and we are not a dying people. I think we got time for one more question if there is one. And if there's somebody who usually don't say nothing, I would love if you raise your hand, because that would be dope. Yes. Will you stand up for me?
What do you think about
So again, not being like comic book head fan bros, like there's probably a Jabari storyline I don't know, but metaphorically. I think, metaphorically, what the Jabaris represent is folks who are set aside, but when it was necessary, they saw the connections and they pressed the folks in Wakanda to say, hey, how have you ostracized us? I have enough wisdom to help you get your kingdom back. And let's be very clear, if I build Wakanda, it ain't finna be a kingdom, right? Ain't gonna be one person who decides and a council of elders sitting on the side. It's gonna be something much more deeply democratic. But what the Jabari also did, they said, I'm gonna assist you and help you get it back, but now it's the responsibility of folks in Wakanda to say, how have we harmed you and how can we incorporate you? Some folks may wanna sit in a different place, totally fine with me. But as long as they're sitting in that place by choice and have what they need, then we'll be all right. All right, thank y'all brothers very much for rocking with me today.
If you all will please remain standing and begin singing the Morehouse hymn.
It's right or left, right? I'm sorry.
Huh?
I've done that many times. Who starts it?
We can. Dear old Morehouse, dear old Morehouse, we have pledged our lives to thee, and will ever, yea forever, give ourselves in loyalty. True forever, to old Morehouse may we be. So to mighty son the other, into ties more brotherly. Holy Spirit, make us steadfast, honest, true, to old Morehouse